Hello, my name is Caitlin Krasansky, and today I'm going to be discussing event listeners. Event listeners are functions in JavaScript, and these are functions that listen for events like clicks, mouse movements, key presses, or even more complex triggers like the finishing of a page loading, for example. Um, so Let's see, when we talk about event listeners, we have three major parts that we have to include and make sure that we have in our listener. So we're going to start by looking at this button that we have here, and there it is on the browser. Um, and here's our JavaScript for it. So first, we want to make sure that we have declared the event listener and connected it to our HTML. So here's the actual listener itself. And first, what we need to make sure that we have is the actual target element that is going to be triggering the event. Secondly, we need to make sure we have the event that we're listening for. So like I said, this is like a click, a key press, etc. Um, and then lastly, the last major part that we need to include is our function, our callback. So this is going to be something that runs every time that we run the event, or for how many times we need to run the event. So in our case, our button is going to be clicked, and we should be receiving an alert that reads button was clicked. So let's see how it works. All right, and there it is. Our alert button was clicked, so we can exit out of that. And what we see down here is actually another event listener that I added in here. So when working with event listeners, it's pretty important to remember that they occur in the order that they are defined in the JavaScript file. So because I added two and this one came second for the same target element, this didn't occur until after we were done with this first event listener. So let's take a look at this event listener. So we have the target element button, click as our event, and then we have a different function. So this is just logging to the console the information about our event. So let's take a look at that. So here we have tons of information about the event that just occurred when we did perform the click. Most importantly, what it shows us is the target, like I was talking about. So this is um, the element target, but there are also different kinds of targets called current targets. And when we talk about current targets, we're referring to the element that the listener is currently attached to. So the current target can change as the event moves up or down the DOM tree. And what I mean by this is that when an event occurs, the event can also trigger listeners on other elements before and after it reaches the target element, which would be our click me button. This is known as event propagation, and it occurs in two phases called bubbling and capturing. So that's what we're going to be looking at here with these three boxes, as well as the document itself. So we'll take a look at that. So we have our three divs, grandparent, parent, child, and like I said, um, the document is kind of like a great grandparent in this case. So let's bring those into view by declaring them. So here we have them declared. And we're going to start with the grandparent function, which is going to be this purple box. So let's get that. All right, so before we get into the phases of bubbling and capturing and current target and all that, let's just focus on this event listener for the grandparent. So pretty similar to the button, we have our target element, grandparent. Then we have the event that's occurring, the click, and then in this case, we are just going to be using an arrow function where the event object is just called E. And this is pretty common actually with a lot of developers and their event listeners. It just makes it pretty simple and straightforward. So, and we're in this case, we're also going to be logging to the console the words grandparent one. So let's take a look at that. So when we click the grandparent, that's what should occur. All right, and there we go, grandparent one. And now, like I said, so when we have child elements, they all are going to go back to the target element or the parent element or to the child element, and depending on which direction you're going. So that's how we get into bubbling and capturing. Um, so with parent and child listeners, when you're clicking on the element, you receive the events of all parent elements because you're technically clicking on all of them. Right now, we don't have any event listeners for the child or the parent. We just have the grandparent. But we can see that when we do click on the parent, we get the grandparent. When we click on the child, we get the grandparent as well. When we click on the document, we don't get anything though, because like I said, that's the great grandparent. So that's behind this element right here. But we can bring those into view. Let's bring those other elements into view so that we can separate these event listeners. Okay, so now we have our parent, our child, and then the document itself. So let's see what happens when we click on the child element. All right, so we get our child, our parent, our grandparent, and then document one. So when we're looking at this, it's going out from the closest element out to the furthest away. And this is where we get into bubbling and capturing. So when we move from the closest element to the furthest away, like we have here, this is called bubbling. And this is one half of how events work and how event propagation works. So bubbling is the default phase of most event listeners in JavaScript, and the other half is going to be called capturing. And capturing is always going to happen before bubbling, and it's the process of going towards the closest element, starting from the furthest away element. So if we were capturing, we would have printed document one, grandparent, parent, child. But we can actually see that if we add in a capture event listener. So let's do that. So instead of this grandparent, I'm going to change this. And for the most part, it looks like the original grandparent event listener, but instead, as the third parameter, we added capture true. So this is changing it from a bubbling event listener to a capturing one. And let's see what happens. So we're going to click the child again. And here we have grandparent first, and it does not appear here either. So what we're seeing here is the document going to the grandparent, and then we have the bubbling starting where it starts at our closest target element and moving out. But because we didn't have a regular bubbling grandparent event listener, there is none here. But there we can see that, and we can see it further if we add capture event listeners and bubbling event listeners for all of them. So let's do that. Clutter this out quickly. All right. So here we, starting with the grandparent, we have a capture event listener, then the regular bubbling event listener, capture for the parent, bubble for the parent, capture for the child, bubble for the child, document capture, document bubble. So, and it's important to notice that when I do this, it doesn't matter the order that they are here because capturing always comes first. So let's click on the child and see what happens. Okay, so we have document, grandparent, parent, child, child, parent, grandparent, document. So as we can see, it's going document, grandparent, parent, child, child, parent, grandparent, document. And that right there is the direction of capturing and bubbling and how that works when we're working with event listeners. So overall, when it comes to working with these phases of event propagation, the bubbling phase is more common, like I said, to use by developers than the capturing phase because it allows for something called event delegation. And event delegation basically is the process of a parent element handling an event triggered by child elements. So, and this is just making it more efficient for handling events on multiple elements, basically. Event delegation is a big part of event listening. However, due to time, I'm just going to move on to the last key aspects of event listeners. So, in order to stop the phases of event propagation, there are different ways that you can interrupt the process to remove the listener altogether, or remove the listener altogether. So, if we wanted to entirely stop all future propagation, we could use something called event.stop propagation. And this, what this will do is stop all phases from occurring after it is used. So let's try to add this into our above example. All right, so this is going to be substituting for our parent capture. And what we have here, we have the capture true, but here we can see the event dot stop propagation. So let's see what happens when we use this. I'm going to click on the child. All right, so as we can see, starts with document capture, grandparent capture, parent capture, but we don't have that child capture, and nor do we have the subsequent bubbles that are supposed to come after that. Now, if we want the event to only occur once, we could use a third parameter inside the listener and set it as follows. So can we just take this out? We're going to substitute this for the parent bubble. Let's see, where's that? Okay, so what we have here is our third parameter. Instead of, it's where we had the capture true, but now we have once true. So, and like I said, this is what's gonna make the event listener only occur once. So let's see that. So here we have all of them: document, grandparent, parent, child, child, parent, grandparent, document. But if we do it again, let's see. So I know it's a little hard to read, but starting here, document capture, grandparent, parent, child capture, and then we get into the bubbles. And remember, we substituted the parent bubble to only happen once, and it happened up here. But down here, we don't see any parent bubble. Another way that we can actually do this is just to remove the listener altogether. So here we're going to go back to the original button, kind of. So let's do that and comment all of this out. We also don't need this. Okay, so what we have here is we just have our function separated so that we can see it more clearly. We have the alert button clicked, but instead after the alert, we have button remove event listener. And this also has the event that we're listening for, and it refers to the handle click function. So, and here's our add event listener. So we have the original event listener, but after it executes once, that event listener will be removed. So this is just another way of kind of handling these processes. So let's see what happens. Button clicked, okay, and we got our pointer event too. Now let's see if we do it again. All right, see, we didn't get our alert this time. We did get this because that is still running and we haven't removed that event listener. However, because we removed that event listener, it only occurred once when it went through this function. Removing and adjusting the processes of event propagation is key to event listeners. It enhances our code maintainability, helps with debugging, and prevents possible memory leaks, among other things.